webinar host. Welcome to our wellness webinar. Our topic is boundaries and compassion fatigue, things many of us have become more familiar with on this pandemic journey. Carlie Pagens has graciously partnered with Eastside Church of God to facilitate today's learning session. Carlie is an assistant professor in counseling and internship coordinator at Briarcrest Seminary in Carenport, Saskatchewan. She also works in private practice as a therapist. Carlie has over 10 years' experience in healthcare and education environments, which has provided her with experience working with people struggling with mental health issues and/or addictions, working with youth, adults, and families. Our desire for this session is to acknowledge our community's hands-on frontline workers, people who have consistently risen to the challenge and uncertainty of this extended pandemic journey with commitment and perseverance. We see you, healthcare workers, educators, emergency responders, and support staff. It's our hope that Carlie's passion for mental and spiritual wellness will bring both learning and encouragement in this session. Thank you for tuning in. I encourage you to share this webinar link with family, friends, and on your social media platforms.
We joked, before we started recording about this, because I am not always great at boundaries. I would say I'm better than I once was. I'd say I'm significantly better than I was a few years ago. But I think as helping professionals, we love people and we want to care for them well. And that's our priority. And that's a beautiful thing. But sometimes in that, it's really difficult to set up and maybe even more difficult to maintain healthy boundaries. I would say it's even more difficult when we're struggling, right? Because we feel good when we care for others. And when we're struggling, we want to feel better. And so it can end up in this cycle that can be, there's no good end to when we're exhausted. And then to feel okay, we are pouring out more of ourselves and more of ourselves. And really, ultimately, we can expect to find ourselves in a place of burnout there. So we want to find ways to have healthy boundaries. I used to be pretty hesitant to boundaries. Because I thought that really boundaries, when I've set a boundary, the boundary is good for me, but not for the other person. And what I have come to, first cognitively, and now I'd say like my whole self believes, is that boundaries can be good for both parties. Not just in the way of like, if I don't set up a boundary, then I get burnt out and I can't help you. Now that's a part of it. But I actually think boundaries help beyond that. I think healthy boundaries help us portray to the other person that we have confidence, that they have resilience. And so if I take it all on for you, then I don't give you a chance to practice your problem solving skills. I don't give you a chance to believe that you can do it and feel proud of the ways in which you are able to self-regulate or problem solve or all of those things. I think when we have poor boundaries, sometimes we portray that we don't think people are able to do something on their own. And that creates dependence, which isn't helpful for either. And it's not good about how we feel about ourselves when we don't think that we're confident as people. Beyond that, setting good boundaries, I think, helps us be good role models for those who look to us. And in helping professionals, people do look up to us. And so being able to role model that for them sets up, the next generation or the next set of people to be healthy themselves as well. So I think in all of those things, it's made me more open to seeing the importance of boundaries, seeing the importance of helping people have more than one support, the importance of setting them up early, so people don't maybe feel like the rug is being pulled out from under them when all of a sudden it's coming out of nowhere. I think when boundaries are set up well, they don't feel as awful as we feel thinking about it right now. There can be something about it that can be helpful on both sides. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and then maybe we'll reflect together, and if there's more questions about that. So signs that it's maybe time to consider a boundary, because that's maybe where we start, is like, how do I even know it's time? And so what we want to look at is, how is this impacting me? And again, I use the four gas tank kind of metaphor of what area is this impacting me or my family, and to what severity. So is that like how much or how long is this becoming unreasonable? Now, there are times where it's going to have a big impact on us, and it's a crisis, and it's a high severity but short term, and we're okay with that for a night or two. The situation warrants it, right? We might ask, is this a crisis or a reoccurring thing? And so there are times where we might say, you know what, a boundary isn't needed. It's a one-time thing. But if this is having a significant impact over a period of time, and it's impacting me or my family, that's a pretty good sign that we might want to think through what a boundary might be. Am I running on empty? So sometimes something that would be normal and okay for us, we might have to pull back from simply because of our own state, right? And so I serve in my church, and there have been seasons where I've pulled back and said, hey, next season I need to have a boundary here. I can't volunteer this next kind of small group section just because this part of my life is really busy. I'm running on empty. I can't give more than I can give. And so just, knowing if we're running on empty, we might need to set up some new boundaries. If I'm feeling taken advantage of, or I'm the only one given, Sandra, that comes back to that point of mutual peace. So there are times we mentor people, and there's times that we do give more, especially in our work, but especially in friendships, we want to look for, are we both giving, and even in a mentorship, as mentors, we learn and grow as well, but we want to see people investing into themselves. If I'm the only one giving or working in this area, I've probably taken on too much of it, and it's a good sign I need a boundary. And finally, if my helping seems to be enabling or creating dependence, right? And so, inappropriate dependence is really what we're looking at. If you're talking about, Sandra, sitting on the floor and co-regulating with your child, that's there are children should be dependent on us, until they become independent. But I want to look at, am I creating an inappropriate dependence based on how we're interacting, right? If I say yes when I want to say no, or I feel guilty for saying no, or I say yes because it conflicts with my morals, if my needs are always second, those are the kinds of things that suggest to me I need a boundary in this place of my life. So anything you guys want to add to that part?
This reminded me of something that I read a number of years ago, was a quote that every ask doesn't deserve our yes. And that really was one of those ones that stuck out for me. And the more I thought about it, really, when we do say yes to every ask, we're robbing somebody else of the opportunity to grow and to learn, or to be a blessing in a situation, if we're taking that away. And if every answer is always yes, no means nothing.
Yeah.
We need to have some no's in there in order for those yeses to have impact.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
yeah. Awesome. So let's talk about making decisions around boundaries. So again, this is kind of, it relates to that last slide, but one of this, it's, think about it kind of like almost like a rubric of, should I make a decision? Should I have a boundary here? Is what is the cost to having a boundary, short and long term? And what is the benefit to having a boundary here, short and long term? Because short term, oftentimes the idea of bringing a boundary into play feels like it's actually like one more thing. I'm like, I'm already tapped out. That's one more thing. And it takes effort. For me, it takes emotional effort to create a boundary. And so short term, I'm like, ooh. But if I look at the cost and benefit, short and long term, oftentimes that's a good indicator for me if I need a boundary in place. So if I know that long term, that's going to be healthy for me. I have this like life motto that's been really effective for me. And that is, I always want to do the thing that's kinder to my future self. And so if the here and now is hard, but I know that my future self, it's going to benefit from this thing, I'm more likely to do it. And so I want to look at both of these things, right? Or likewise, I might say, it's easy in the here and now to not have a boundary, but if I, long term, the implications. So we want to look on both sides, short and long term. The second one is it sustainable, and for how long? And do I have the support I need to continue in the setting or for this boundary? Because, I might say, yeah, it's an inconvenience, but it's a sustainable, and it's the place in my life I'm going to choose to have an inconvenience, but only for 3 months, or maybe for a week, right? Like, or I might say, no, this actually isn't sustainable, right? I could do this in the crisis, but this can't be a sustainable thing for me. Or simply like, I don't have the support I need for it. Or I might, if you're like me and boundaries are tough, I might not have the boundaries, the support to set a boundary right now. And I need to lean on, some of my mentors or support systems to feel well enough to be able to hold to whatever boundary I put in place. Why did I enter this, whatever that is, the job, role, friendship, and what's changed? Because maybe what you agreed to when you came on maybe the job has changed, or maybe your circumstances have changed. Maybe you agreed to take on this role, and since there's been a global pandemic and you don't have capacity, that's okay. You can say no now. Or you've had kids, or life has just changed. You're struggling with your own stuff. And so the situation that you entered in and where you are now are different, or the expectation is different, right? Now you're expected to be on call and you weren't before. All these things, understanding that we as people change and our environments change. And so using that to check, okay, something changed. And how does this align with my values? I know for me, that's a big one. There's been times where things have ethically just not been okay with me. And that is a very clear sign for me that I need a boundary. The other thing is that boundaries change, and it's appropriate for them to change. We should revisit our boundaries regularly and see how they need to be changed. If they're still needed, if they need to be tightened up, if I'm following them, maybe have some accountability around them. And lastly, we need to be prepared when we set a boundary for people to push against and violate them. And it's just part of, I work hard to see the good in people, and I think people are well-meaning. I think part of it is just learning how to follow a boundary when they haven't experienced it before. And so, and I don't think it's this malicious thing, but people are going to violate it as they learn how to navigate on the other end. And so the importance of us, communicating that clearly, and then continuing to communicate what our boundary is and sticking to that. There's nothing more confusing than someone setting a boundary and then some days yes, some days no, and how they adhere to it. And so being consistent in how we communicate and stand for our boundaries is important. What do you guys want to add to the boundaries part?
Consistency for sure is key, and to be able to articulate what your need is in the boundary, like stop that. That's a boundary. But explaining more, fleshing that out about why a behavior or an action or something needs to stop and the impact it's having. Sometimes even just explaining that to somebody, they're completely unaware of the impact. There isn't, like you said, the malicious intent, but it's having a significant impact on you as the receiver. So being able to define that. Yeah.
And even doing that when neither side is heated, right? I probably wouldn't recommend doing it in the middle of the behavior. Now, sometimes we have to.
Yes.
But if this is a recurring thing, when it's not happening, if you can come in and have just a calm conversation about it, both sides typically are pretty reasonable, and we can find a way to settle on a boundary that works well for both sides. So again, sometimes something's happening and we put a boundary in place because we need to. But if we can do it on both sides, can use their logical minds and aren't emotionally charged, that can be really helpful.
It would be more successful, I would think. And
Absolutely.
The ability for it to have alignment to your values. That absolutely. Self-awareness, again, is so important to be able to be, fully aware of what your personal core values are, and then how you're living those out. It's much easier to identify, I find, to be able to identify when you said, if something is just sitting sideways for you, you know right away. So to not approach it as in a kind of wandering general way, to be able to specifically be living from that place of personal integrity, your self-awareness is just so much better.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a great point. Yeah. Glenda, any thoughts to add?
I was just thinking around boundaries, and something that we did a number of years ago when our kids were little and still lived at home. It was the boundary around the telephone. And we just chose that, I don't have to answer that phone because it's ringing. And if it's ringing at supper time, I don't have to answer it. I can choose that boundary. And it was something that took us a long time to sort of get used to. And then especially, and I'm old enough that I know when phones came in where you had caller ID, and that was very helpful because I can phone that person back. And I have found that that's really been helpful in the world we live in now, which is cell phones, and to be able to say, you know what, I turn my cell phone off at such and such a time at night, and to be able to do that and really keep that boundary. And it is very freeing.
Yeah. Well, and when you keep the boundary, so my phone actually automatically goes into sleep mode at 8:30. I go to bed at 9:30. I love sleep. It's a great thing. But I coach, like I've coached college softball and I mentor some girls. And so, they check in with me sometimes at night or something's going on. You might get a text and they literally like, they typically don't text me because they just know it'll go to my, like, they won't hear from me. Versus I listen to them with other people. They're like, oh, I didn't even respond. And they actually sometimes have anxiety that maybe someone's ignoring them. But because I literally never respond, it doesn't ding my phone after 8:30. They don't expect it. And so how they respond to someone who hasn't, is not consistent with their boundary is so different than, right? And so that place of just being consistent with it is so important, right? And then we all know what to expect. That's all, right? So, yeah. I know that there'll be some questions about boundaries coming, so I'm sure we'll revisit some of this, but we're going to shift into talking a bit about families and compassion fatigue. So some people are going to watch this because they work in a helping profession and they're likely, going to at some point experience compassion fatigue. And some might be watching this because of someone they love and care about and maybe are worried about. And so we'll chat a little bit about what does it mean to love someone well who's struggling in this area or who's at risk for compassion fatigue. So compassion fatigue is often referred to as the cost of caring for others. I think that's a great definition. It's really that emotional, physical, social, and spiritual toll that we experience as caregivers. And that might be because of our work or because of, caring for an elderly parent or grandparent or our kids, right? It might be from just being a really caring friend and being really compassionate and giving a lot in that realm, or how we serve and volunteer. But it's that toll that is taken on us as caregivers. So most of us who work in a helping profession or care, for elderly parents or those settings will experience a season of compassion fatigue, especially those who are exposed to vicarious trauma or repeated chronic stress, like healthcare workers and teachers in a pandemic, right? I mean, that's almost like this is just a common thing when those are your experiences. Your risk goes goes way up. Some signs, like we talked about earlier, difficulty with concentration and hopelessness, exhaustion and irritability, maybe thoughts about leaving your job, fatigue and difficulty sleeping, mood changes, anger outbursts, feeling discouraged by the world around us, which I think lots of us can relate to, or feeling like things just feel meaningless, or my role now feels meaningless. Does it even matter? And the one for me that's the biggest red flag is becoming cynical. It can be difficult to watch our loved ones go through this. When we think about caregivers in our lives, those are often the people who are consistent and care deeply, are gentle and have big hearts. They are those who we look to when we're struggling. So to see them struggle is something that we often aren't familiar with and we don't know what to do with. It can be overwhelming and scary to see. And oftentimes we don't know what to do with that. And so, I think through a few tips on how you can love that person well in your life. One of the big things is just to be present and not assume what they need, because honestly, what they need might change from day to day. Creating space for them if they're ready to talk, but also not pressuring them to talk. Understanding that due to limits of confidentiality and those kinds of things, they might not be able to talk about some things, but being available, creating a space where they can bring their authentic, full selves. Give away the next slide. Right? It can be just such a helpful thing for those struggling. So we're going to talk through create like you've seen it now. A bit of a roadmap on how do you support someone. So one of the things, like when we talk about caring for ourselves, we talk about caring for others. If we can make a plan ahead of time, we're going to set ourselves up best for success. And so just asking that person ahead of time, hey, when you're struggling, hey, when this impacts you, what do you need from me? How can I help? If it's a friend or if it's a spouse, right? Can I skip the dishes? Can I send you a meal? Is that something that when you're struggling, you would benefit from? Is it okay if I reach out and check on you? When this happens, like, what might you need? Like, you might not ask in the moment, but like, do you need me to take your kids, for a night so you can have some rest? And so asking what are the things ahead of time that you want me to do or say can be really helpful. And then checking in with them. We don't always, as helping professionals, we're not always great at asking for help. And so I said over and over again, let's ask for help. But sometimes it's hard. And so let's check in with those we care about and just wonder how they're doing. Create a safe space for them to be honest and express their needs. Often, as caring professionals, we have to hold ourselves together in our profession. When we show up as teachers or as medical professionals or therapists or wherever we are in that place, we still have to be leaders and we still have to be competent. But having a space where they can come home at the end of the day and be not okay if they're legitimately not okay is so important. Again, like I mentioned, invite them to share, but understand if they're not able to, and not, not take it personally, right? Knowing it's not about, as the person offering help, it's not about you if they're not wanting to at that moment talk, not to be offended by that, but simply be there if they're ready. Remind them of their resources. So, that first step where we said, what do you need in that moment? Remind them, hey, you said that you might need it sometime, or sometime. Can I take your kids so you can go to the gym, so you can do those things that are important to you, so that you can go on that couples retreat or whatever it is. Remind them of what their support system are, their resources. If there's someone that we know well, like a spouse, we know what typically has helped. And so we can encourage them to think through utilizing those supports. Finally, simply show up and be a calm, loving presence. Again, when someone we love isn't doing well, it's easy for us to feel panicked inside. And just being there and being present and being calm in the storm with them, that presence alone can be so significant for someone who's struggling. So those are some kind of, the outworkings of the particulars within that are different from person to person. But that idea of, if we can at a time, ask them, what do you need when you're struggling? And then being present with them throughout, so important. Glenda, Sandra, anything to add to supporting family members?
Just, I guess, in those times when there isn't the strain, to really work on communication. To be able to, again, the self-awareness of understanding what your needs are, being able to identify what it is that you're feeling, and then have those skills in place to communicate them. So,
Absolutely.
If there's somebody who struggles with that, if you have somebody who's more comfortable with the avoidance part, or, we all go back to how we were raised. That's where we're learning how to be in relationship with other people. So if we're not raised in families where there's a lot of open communication, that's something that needs to be learned, because to be in relationship with other people in a family dynamic, particularly, you have to be able to communicate. I'm sure that that COVID has certainly taught that. Is how many of us struggle with some of those things, to be able to identify how we're feeling or communicating that clearly. Yeah. And it's hard to identify the needs if you don't even know. You just know you don't feel right, but you can't really express it.
Yeah. I know for myself, I'm not married, I don't have kids, and so I think though back of times where it's been difficult and the things that were meaningful, and someone just even doing the things like someone who sends DoorDash or skip the dishes to your house when or some flowers or a card says, hey, I love you, I care about you, have just been so meaningful. I'm curious for you guys, is there anything that stands out for you in the past that someone has done for you in the season that was really meaningful?
That's something that, as I don't work in healthcare or any of the demographics at all of, but I know that's something that we try and do as a family is be intentional in that, and that it sometimes catches people off guard, I think, of the impact that it has. It can be something small, showing up at somebody's door with a coffee, finding out, doing a little bit of ninja work to find out what their favorite is, and then just showing up at the door with a coffee. It's reduced people to tears. And I just think, really that's all any of us desire, is to be seen and heard. And if it's just something simple like that, that can really remind somebody that, hey, you know what, I see you, I care about you. And that can make a day.
Huge impact. I think that for myself, and I think others in healthcare, was just somebody saying thank you, or to say thank you, to acknowledge what our coworkers are doing to
Yeah.
acknowledge, anybody that you run into, and to just say thanks. Hey, thanks for doing that.
Thanking us and acknowledging what the season's
Yes.
been like, right? Validating how we might be feeling, all of those things.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And none of those things cost anything. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
That's the importance of something so simple, where there's basic manners of being mindful of that and remembering.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got one slide left before we'll head into questions. And this is something that I've really, self-compassion, it's not a new term for me, but it's something that has become very meaningful for me in this COVID season, especially at the beginning of COVID. I worked at a COVID testing site where I was pretty overwhelmed, experienced some pretty significant anxiety in that setting, and found myself really, struggling. You go into the COVID testing site and feeling quite anxious, and then judging myself for how I felt. So I'd be like, why aren't you strong enough? Or why aren't you, you've done this for so many years, why? And being critical. And a friend of mine reintroduced me to this idea of self-compassion. And just, that question that we all hear, you're so compassionate to those around you. You're so gentle and kind and filled with grace. And, with those around you, what might it be like to do that for yourself? What might it be like to understand that you are human, you have limits? And as much as I'd love to help everyone, that's how I'm wired. I have limits and I can't. Especially in this COVID season, we've seen that we have limits. There's an end to what we can give. And so honoring that and acknowledging and being kind to that part of us that knows that there are limits. Being curious about what our own experience might tell us instead of shaming ourselves. So if something's difficult, wondering what that might be about. And then my new favorite phrase is this word, of course. So when I would, when I walk into work and I was anxious, being like, Carlie, of course you feel like this. We're in a global pandemic and this is where you're going to work. It's scary, of course. It's okay to be a bit afraid here, right? Or, when I can't be present with a friend because something's happened, of course it's difficult right now. This is what's happened. Right. And validating, it's a self-validation of what you're experiencing. So instead of getting to this point of being critical, of saying, well, why can't I, or I should be able to, saying, of course, this is what you're experiencing. Remember, this is what the context is. And that really just gives us space to not add more to what we're already experiencing. Right. And then asking for help when we need it. Right. And so, it seems like a wild thing, but asking a friend, like, hey, can you just come help me with this thing? Like, can you help me clean my house, or can you help me watch my kids for a night, or can you, but if it's something that is tangible, someone can help with, I know that I'd love to do that for a friend who's struggling. And so being okay to ask for that myself if I need something. And then last, do what works. So, as an act of self-compassion, if I know there's something that'll help me feel better, I need to do it. And that comes with that idea of being kind to my future self, right? Of what can I do now that's going to help me for tomorrow, and doing the things that I know work for me, so that I can be healthy long-term. So I love this idea of self-compassion, tying it back to that first quote of, if we're not well, we can't help others. And so self-compassion for me is a pretty significant tool on how I can stay well myself. And I will say, has had a significant impact in me being just much healthier in my own life, at this place versus where I was maybe when I was working in healthcare and just couldn't find that place of self-compassion. So, Sandra, Glenda, anything to add to that idea?
I really like the your being kind to your future self. I love that. That's really resonating for me. Yeah. It's do the next right thing, but do the next right thing that involves kindness to yourself.
Yeah. And the thing is, here's what it came out of for me is today might be difficult. And I know that tomorrow might also then be difficult. How do I make tomorrow a little bit less difficult? Like, if I can't fix today, if today is tough, I can't fix it. How do I do something that makes tomorrow a little bit better? And so that for me is often like, how do I just eat a healthy meal so that I feel energy tomorrow? Mm-hmm. How do I just go to bed early? Or how do I, what's something I can do today that even though it might not feel good today, right? Tomorrow I'll feel a little bit better. Mm-hmm. So might not be able to make today great, but maybe I can make tomorrow better.
Yes.
So yeah.
Mhm.
Then what we'll do is we'll switch to questions. I'll leave the slide up for like maybe all of 5 seconds, just because it's got my email on it and our email and our website. Myself and a fellow therapist, Margaret, both counsel from those websites how you can find information. We both love working with those in the helping profession. There's a lack of, I think, supports often out there for those who, for therapists who work with clergy or other mental health professionals or other helping professionals, and those are passions of both of us. So if you're interested in therapy or anything that we offer, feel free to reach out via email or check out our website. So I'll stop sharing my screen and we can go to questions. There you go.
Glenda, do you want to do your questions?
I was going to say the one question that I had that somebody else asked me is, it all makes really good sense and this was all really good to listen to, but how do I do it? How do I get started? That whole sense of being overwhelmed by, I need to eat better, I need to sleep better, I need to do these things, I need to do that things. And so the question is how do you get started?
Yeah.
I know everything I need to do. And we know everything, here's the steps and here's all the helps, but how do I do that when I'm sitting at my table? And I had a friend say that to me a while ago. As I'm sitting at my table, I know I need to go have a shower. I know I need to do these things, but I'm not doing it.
Yeah. I think there's a few things. The first one, and I spoke to it a bit earlier, is pick the easiest thing. Like, so for sometimes like showering is not the easiest thing, right? And so what is the easiest thing? And that will provide even 1% of relief. So if you look at like a whole pie, I don't look at it as like, what's the whole pie? I'm like, how do I get myself 1% and then 1% and then 1%? And so the only thing that I might be able to do right now is take a deep breath. And that might help me 1%. Okay, and then what? Okay, like I might feel a little bit better if I brush my teeth. Okay, and then what? If showering, like motivation to do self-care is really difficult, what's something that helps feel a little bit better to get me there? That's the first thing is if it's too overwhelming, it's too overwhelming. You got to pick something smaller to start. And really that, of course, it's overwhelming. Like having compassion, we get into judging ourselves for not being able to do that thing and go, well, I can't even shower. I'm going, oh, like it's too big. What's one thing that I actually could do right now that would help? And taking a deep breath helps me 1%. That's 1%. Awesome. Let's do it. Right. So too overwhelming, pick something smaller. Keep chunking it down until it feels reasonable. And then celebrate that when you do. Be like, okay, like instead of going, oh, it was only a deep breath, going, okay, I chose to do something that cared for myself right now. And I can feel good about that. And when we feel good about that, we want to do, I'm highly motivated by that. For me, it's like, okay, I'm proud of myself. I did something. What else is something small I can do? The second is you got to figure out your why, right? And so for me, what has been effective is this thing of being kind to my future self. It's something I picked up in college, this motto, and it's worked really well for myself of going, I might not be able to feel better today, but I care about how I'm going to be later. I don't want to be in this rut forever. So if I can't do this thing now, my why is I want to do something that's going to set me up so that tomorrow sucks a little less if I'm in that rut. And so for me, that's worked. And so for this friend, Glenda, that might not be it, but figuring out what's the thing that's going to be effective, what's going to motivate them, right? And kind of maybe having a friend to talk through that of what might help be motivating for them. When I found mine, it made a big difference, right? I also like, I'm a funny duck. I'll bribe myself and it's effective. And I'm a rule follower. So if I'm like, if you do this thing, Carlie, you can have this thing. I won't give it to myself unless I do it. Right. And so, when I wanted to learn to run, every 10 runs, I got something, and there was like these like motivators. And at the end of it, I ran a 10K and it was easy, but to get started, I couldn't get started, but I could bribe myself to get started. Again, it worked great for me. For some people, they're like, well, why don't you just buy the thing? No, I will only buy the boots when I run 30 runs. So that's that thing of do what works, but it's figuring out what works for everyone, and that's different. So I don't know if is that helpful?
Very helpful. Yep, thanks.
Self-bribery is fantastic.
Exactly.
I'm presuming when you mean self-bribery, you don't mean like mini eggs.
No, although I did get through grad school that way. It was like every 100 words I could have like, I don't eat a lot of refined sugar now, but I could have like a Reese's Pieces, like those like Smartie size ones. It's like every 100 pages of it worked. That's actually probably where I learned to bribe myself. You know, and now it's more like, you know, like TV time or, you know, I'm pretty like careful like financially, but I wanted these pair of boots for a long time. And so that was kind of a motivator, you know, with running at the end. Once I run a 10K, I could go to Banff because there was a run there that I wanted to do. So it was finding things where, you know, I had to save for to do, but I only got it. So I had to save either way. And I could only get that thing if as a reward. And so for me, that worked. I wouldn't suggest mini eggs as a motivator. I definitely gained some weight in grad school while using food as a motivator. It's just not a great, it's not a great way to have a healthy relationship with food.
It is not.
Now, if it's something like I get to go out for a fine dining with some friends, it's totally different. But if you every motivator is mini eggs, it might be problematic.
Yep.
Yeah.
It would.
Yeah.
Any other questions, Glenda?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
We'll let you go.
I know you got a list there, Sandra.
Yeah, well, I had asked a few people, so I do have a few that one of them was actually related to pandemic eating and the relationship with food. So how to go about addressing an unhealthy relationship that some of us have developed with food. So how to avoid things like restrictive diets or binge eating or comfort food eating, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think so. It's like I'll maybe preface it with this isn't an area of expertise, and I think there's so much stuff out there that like there's so much information and misinformation out there. I'm a fan of like, again, you know, do what works. I think we have a pretty good understanding of what's a healthy, like well-rounded diet, and those things help us feel good. I also know just from being a human who, and I don't eat a lot of refined sugar now, but literally if I eat refined sugar, it's like the next 2 weeks, it's so hard to not eat refined sugar. And understanding even like the grace for yourself in trying to make changes is really difficult, right? And motivation to change is really difficult. You know, you know, rigid things don't seem to help. But taking an approach of moderation in all things, whether that be diet or exercise or you know, like I would be equally concerned about someone who like, you know, any healthy thing can be taken to an unhealthy place without moderation. So it's, I think being kind to yourself, you know, in that process, you know, moderation. I'm not sure I've fully myself conquered how to figure out how to have the best relationship with food. But I think acknowledging that it's a problem is a good first start. You know, I probably believe more in, you know, what's healthy and how do we feel healthy about what we eat. Like I know that when I eat fruits and vegetables, I just function better, right? And so paying attention to what your body needs and doing more of that. But in terms of like how to do that, you know, it might be more of a dietitian that has more strategies on how to manage that well. You know, I do know that motivational interviewing can be really helpful when someone has low motivation to change around eating, and that's really about finding the, you know, if you're wanting to make a change, the motivation behind it and how you can utilize that to be consistent and following through.
Yeah, we are what we eat, I think.
Totally, yeah.
The fruits and vegetables and stuff, and it shows when we eat well, for sure.
Yeah, it's amazing how different I function though when I'm eating well versus if I'm living on mini eggs, right?
Yes,
so,
yeah.
Although I think we'd all love to function on mini eggs. You know, your brain just doesn't work right.
They're everywhere. Another question was about rest, just taking a rest day. So I feel guilty when I take a rest day. How do I change my narrative about letting myself rest?
Yeah, there's a slide that we read that said we can't be helpful to others if we aren't well ourselves. And I, you know, again, I hope that for all of us, we can get to the point where we prioritize our own needs, that we love ourselves deeply in the same way that we love others, and that we give ourselves the same permission that we would give others. You know, I have friends where if they want to take a weekend away, I'm happy to watch their kids. And I can't imagine sometimes taking a weekend away. I think I've become better at it more recently, but if we can't do it for ourselves, which I would hope we can get there, if we're not quite there yet, maybe just remembering the fact that if I want to be helpful for others, I can't be running on fumes. And knowing that when I'm at my best, I serve others well. You know, I'm more present for my kids. I'm not as reactive, right? I'm calmer. I'm a better friend and spouse and parent and employee and all those things. And so if I take this time away, I'm actually going to be more effective.
Mhm.
I mean, we're seeing data come out of countries that talk about a shortened work week and how we're more productive in those settings. And so that's all about the idea of rest. And so prioritizing that helps us be effective in other places. And so if we can't do it for ourselves, maybe we can do it because we know that, right, we can care for others better when we do that.
Well, we were created to be human beings, not human doings.
Yeah,
I think we
absolutely.
all get pretty distracted by the doing and forget
Yeah.
about the being.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You know, can you imagine, you know, as parents, if we could set that for our kids? I think often we have learned these patterns from somewhere of busyness. And so maybe we can't even do it, you know, we can't do it for ourselves, but we can do it to show patterns for our kids that rest is important and self-care and self-compassion, all of these things. What if we could learn to role model that for the next
Oh,
generation?
absolutely. That would
How
be a
different
gift.
might it be for them?
An absolute gift. I
Right.
think of conversations, you know, when you would be more often to be out, you know, pre-COVID maybe, but the conversations with families, you know, families that have kids still at home. And
Yeah.
it's, you know, oh, how are you? So busy, I'm busy. And we've become a society that glorifies busy.
It's like a
And
token,
the
yeah.
message that we're sending our kids in that is
Yeah.
do, go, you know, shove in whatever as a, you know, a snack or, you know,
Yeah.
stand-in meal in the minivan while we run to activities and that sort of thing. And I think, oh gosh, we've fed that. And it's going to
Yeah.
be, I think, that conscious effort of being intentional and showing them what it's like to not do. Maybe that's part of the gift of COVID in that respect,
Yeah,
that
absolutely,
we've
right.
become more aware of just sometimes how much busy filled our lives, but how little value that perhaps added to our lives.
Yeah. Yeah. What, you know, what would it be like to start any narrative? I was reading an article today that just talked about, like, you know, we should all take 20 minutes a day of rest, unless you're busy, and then you should take an hour. And that idea of like the importance of that. Right.
Mhm.
So
Yes, for sure.
For sure.
Then a couple of questions about boundaries. One was a co-parenting question. How do I set and maintain healthy boundaries as I try to co-parent with an aggressive other parent?
yeah, I mean, I think that's acknowledging that's a really tough one. That's a place where you need to practice a lot of self-compassion. That's a place where we don't want to find ourselves. You know, it's hard to set boundaries in healthy places. And that sounds like a really difficult space. So, you know, I'm hoping that you can have some compassion for yourself and that you have a good support system if that's where you find yourself. Really, though, I think the biggest thing that I can think of in that space is setting boundaries when it's not an aggressive interaction. So setting a time when both sides are calm and coming together and collaborating as much as you can. And again, I don't know if there's, you know, courts or those things involved that you know, do have some rigidity around what you can and can't do. But coming together when things are calm and talking it out, and then having some kind of, you know, maybe written agreement that you both sit with, that you can hold on to, that you can refer back to in an email, but have some kind of agreement that you're both aware of when you're both settled, where there's clarity and communication. And that takes a lot of work to do, but if you can do that work ahead of time and have that to come back to, I wonder how helpful that might be. You know, I'm guessing that's nothing new, but trying to engage as the least amount possible when things are heated and aggressive. And then when things are calm, finding ways to revisit what didn't work about that boundary. Because again, we're going to need to come back and reevaluate things. And so something's not working here. Let's come back when we're both calm and talk about what happened, you know, as calmly and settled as we can, and reevaluate that boundary and what can we do different to avoid the escalation that happened there, right? So, yeah.
And one last one, when in a relationship with a child or family member who's living in addiction, active addiction, when does nurturing become enabling, and how can you best nurture while not enabling?
Yeah, what a great
Find
question.
that line.
That is a tension that I think parents are consistently living out from, you know, from a time a child is, you know, essentially born until I don't know if that ever ends actually. Like friends who have adult children, like I'm learning that it doesn't seem to get much easier. And so that's a tension that we're constantly walking in. I think the answer changes. There are a few things that I think, important to be aware of, like, is this a mutual thing? Are we both working at this, right? So I want to help, but I don't want to help more than they're doing. And I don't want to do for them. So I might want to, if they're struggling to do something, rather than me making that phone call for them, maybe I'll be present with them, and we'll put the first time, maybe we'll put it on speakerphone, and we'll do it. You'll talk, and then if you need help, you can shoulder tap, and I'll talk, and then you'll go. But working towards something, right? And so I remember in college learning this model in a youth ministry class about how do you help teenagers develop skill, and this model of like, hey, I'll do it first, and you watch me. Right? And then I'll do it, and you're going to help me. And then you're going to do it, and I'll help you. And then you're going to do it, and I'll be beside you. And so as long as we're progressing somewhere, it's okay sometimes that we might do the thing so they can see what it looks like to do it well. And then they're going to do it, and we're going to be beside you. But if it's not progressing, I would be concerned. And I'd also be concerned if, like, that place of, like, if they're not willing to partner with you, right? If they're not willing to try as well. One of the things that when someone asks me for help, and again, I don't have kids, so I spent most of my career though working adolescent mental health and addictions. One of the first things, I'm working with a youth, and they're like, I just don't know what to do. I will not offer more ideas than they do. So I'll say, like, give me one idea. Like, what's one thing that might not even work, right? And for every one that they give, if they're struggling, I'll give one more. Right? But I don't want to offer 10 ideas. We're gonna partner in this, and everything we do is a partnership. And so that idea of enabling becomes when we start to do it all, because they start to believe that they can't do it, and they actually lose the skills. Like the way our brain is wired and how it fires, when we do it for someone, they lose the ability to do it themselves. So partnering is a great way to do it. But if we are consistently doing it for them, and we're feeling, and too, like, we feel it, like we can feel it when it's like, why am I doing all of this? Pay attention to your gut in that. But I think it becomes problematic when we're not seeing that progression, taking into account, again, limitations and age and ability and all those things. But if it's not an owned effort, and it doesn't seem to be shifting more onto them, then there would be an indication that maybe a boundary is needed. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's
awesome. Well, thank you both so much for joining with me, and
thank you.
thank you to Eastside Church for having me. It was an absolute joy. So
good. Thank you, and thank you, Glenda.
Yes, and thank you for all your information. It's very helpful, and Sandra for working with me.
Yeah. Great. Well, I appreciate it. Thanks so much. Just have a bit of a closing here for you. If this session has left you needing further information or support, or if you'd like to receive the PDF of the resources shared in today's session, please reach out via email to Shauna at eastsidechurch.ca. That's all one word. Shauna will assist you in getting connected and can forward you the resources. This earthly walk can be really challenging sometimes. None of us should ever walk alone or suffer in silence. Ram Dass says it so well. We're all just walking each other home.